Hey everybody, this is the fourth here, and in this video I'm going to be talking a little bit about how and when you might use a compressor while mixing a track. There are a ton of different ways to use a compressor and a ton of different situations in which you might want to use a compressor while mixing. And in this video I'm not going to provide an extensive list of all the different possibilities, because there are just really way too many to even cover in a single video. But in this video, I'm just going to be kind of giving a general idea of when and how you might use compression. So the way compression works is it reduces the dynamic range of your sound. And so essentially, you're going to use a compressor anytime that you want to reduce the dynamic range of a sound. And there are a few different reasons you might want to reduce the dynamic range of a sound. In the previous video, I was working with this tom sample here. And you could hear that when I turned on the compressor and set the threshold and the ratio appropriately, and then used the makeup gain to bring it back to about the same peaking level, it really added a lot of body to that tom. And so in this case, what compression has done is it's reduced the difference in amplitude between your initial transient, the initial attack of the sound, and then the level of the tail. And when I apply the makeup gain to bring it back to about the same peaking level, essentially what I've done is I've brought up the level of that tail while keeping the level of the peak the same. So one way of using compression is to kind of beef up or fatten up your sounds. And you can hear for this clap example, the similar thing is happening. That tail is getting boosted by the compressor. But what's actually happening is the dynamic range is being reduced, and then you're bringing that level back up. So for this clap, I don't really like the compressor sound. Depending on what I'm trying to do with it, in some cases that might sound good. In other cases, I might really prefer the original clap sound. And the same thing goes for the tom. If I want a nice kind of tight tom sound, I could leave it as is. But if I want a fatter, more present body on that tom, I can have the compressor on. And a lot of people do this for kicks. If I have this kick here, you might be able to hear that with the compressor on, it is boosting the tail on that kick. And I might, make it have a higher ratio if I want it to be a bit fatter. And now you can really hear it. So one use of compressors is really just to fatten up your sounds. And how you do this, or whether you do this, is really completely up to you. It's really going to come down to you listening closely to what you're doing while setting the threshold and the ratio and all of the other parameters as well. And then it's definitely a good idea to hear the sound with it on, and then double check it against the sound with that compression off, to make sure that you're getting the kind of sound that you want. And, so doing this with drum sounds is pretty common. In electronic dance music, you want nice fat drums. So a lot of people compress their drums. But I personally don't compress my drums all that often, and that's really just because I design my drums, I synthesize them or do other things during the sound design stage in such a way that I don't really need to compress my drums. Like if you listen to this kick here, it's really fat and it doesn't have any compression at all. It's going straight to the master track, which has no compression on it. Whereas this kick without the compression is really, nowhere near as fat as this one. And that's just because of the volume envelope I've used between these two. You can see that the volume envelope on the actual synthesizer is quite a bit different. So, unfortunately, it is really up to you. It's up to your ears. It's up to paying attention and deciding whether you want to fatten up your sound or whether you don't. And if you do, then it's just really listening to how the compressor is affecting the sound while you're adjusting the various parameters. So you can look up techniques regarding fattening your drum sounds up or fattening other sounds up as well. Just always be careful because every sound is going to be different. So if someone provides you with very specific settings for the parameters, know that that's not going to be the case for every sound. Every kick is going to need to be compressed differently and so on. So fattening up your sounds is one reason why you might want to use a compressor. And another reason is just to make your sounds more uniform regarding the dynamics. So if you look in the playlist here, you can see that I have two versions of the same piano. And you can see that, one of them has some pretty high peaks compared to the other one. And if you listen to the piano when I play it, and then you listen to this version, you can hear that the chord hits kind of stand out quite a bit. And in this case, I didn't quite want that to happen. It kind of made the piano seem a little bit unbalanced in the track that I was making. So I did a little bit of compression on it just to reduce those big peaks from the chord hits. And it helps the piano sound a lot more uniform throughout. Instead of having these big peaks of sound when those chord hits, it's compressed and it kind of sounds like it fits a little bit better with the other piano notes. It really just softens up those chord hits, which may or may not be a good thing. It depends on the kind of sound you want, the kind of sound you were going for. For the track that this piano plays in, I did want it to be, a little bit softer with those chords. I wanted to compress that a little bit. And I thought it sounded better regarding the overall track with the softer chord hits. But on its own, it could really go either way, depending on what you want. And in a different track, I might opt for this version instead. But you can see in this example, I'm not really doing it to fatten up the piano or anything. I haven't adjusted the gain. I'm mostly just doing it to kind of get the piano sound to be a little bit more uniform in terms of the dynamic range throughout that piano track. So compression isn't always used to fatten up your sounds, and a lot of people kind of focus on fattening up sounds as the real purpose of a compressor, but there are a lot of other uses. just helping to keep your sounds more uniform, like in this piano, is one great example. And a common sound to do this with as well is vocals.
And spoke what I've heard. I heard some people's hearts, interfered some people.
And so you can see in this vocal file, if I kind of make the waveform a bit larger, there's quite a bit of dynamic range throughout the vocal file. And that's probably not something you really want. You can see that it really changes throughout the sound. And so on the effects, you can see that I did some EQ. This is to de-ess the vocal, and I'll cover de-essing in a later video. But for the limiter, you can see that
I've done everything wrong from head to toe. I've done everything upside down. Should I be paying for it? I said all the wrong things all in the wrong moments. Heard what I shouldn't have.
And so I've set the compressor to just kind of make it a little bit more uniform throughout that vocal file, so that, certain parts aren't quieter than other parts, and it just makes it more uniform. So I didn't use a very high ratio. I used a ratio of 2:1. And you can hear that if I turn that limiter off, or I guess the compressor off.
Against the love and all the girls' boyfriends, all the right things are also bad for me. Can't stop thinking against the love and all.
You can probably really hear it in this section. If I turn it back on, you'll hear that it just is a lot more balanced. So here's with it off.
Can't stop thinking against the love and all the girls' boyfriends, all the right things.
And here's with it on.
Can't stop thinking against the love and all the girls' boyfriends, all the right things are. Can't stop thinking.
And here's it off again.
Can't stop thinking against the love and all the girls' boyfriends, all the right things are. Can't.
And here's it on again.
Can't stop thinking against the love and all the girls' boyfriends, all the right.
So you can hear with it on, it just kind of evens out those vocals, and you don't get those changes in the volume of the vocals as much. So again, it wasn't really intended to fatten up the vocals or anything. I just wanted to make them more uniform so that they, fit in the mix a little bit better. They weren't kind of changing a whole lot in volume, because if they're changing a whole lot in volume and it's not really necessary for them to change in volume like that, it just really makes mixing a little bit more difficult to get the level right on those vocals, since they do change. And just using that compressor evens everything out. It makes it sit right in the mix and all that. So these are really the two main things that I use compressors for in my production. I don't tend to use a whole lot of compression, and really I only use it, when I need to solve a certain problem. Like with the vocal, I want to keep that vocal more even. Same thing with the piano. Or if I want to fatten up, a drum loop, a drum sound. And really, any time that you want to reduce the dynamic range of a sound for some reason or to achieve a certain type of effect is when you would want to use a compressor. And like I've said, there are a ton of different techniques out there that you could read about. I definitely encourage you to get used to how a compressor works first, and kind of try to use compression in your production before looking up all kinds of different techniques, because it's a very subjective matter, and how someone uses compression might not be right for you. I personally use compression a very little amount compared to how often some other people use compression, and that's just because of my workflow. It's how I do things. It's how I like things to sound. So the different techniques you'll read about are definitely great to know about, but in the end, it all comes down to what you want to hear and what you like. And so if you know how a compressor works, and you kind of know the result that you want to achieve for a certain sound, that will help you out so much. And you'll be able to kind of use a compressor on your own and do exactly what you want to do with that compressor. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully it gave you a little bit better of an idea of how a compressor can work in production. And like I said, this isn't an extensive list of how to use a compressor and different techniques you can use with a compressor. It's just kind of a general idea of what you can use a compressor for. And this video is just about compression. In later videos in this section of the tutorial, I will be covering limiting, sidechain compression, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I definitely recommend you watch through all those videos before really looking up other techniques. But it's also a great idea to look up other techniques as well.